Grace Morgan stood frozen in the galley of Flight 2847, her hands trembling as she clutched the meal cart. Her face had turned pale, almost white as a ghost. Through the narrow opening, she could see the teenage girl in seat 2A, a beautiful black girl with perfectly styled braids, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than Grace's entire monthly salary. The girl's voice carried to the cabin, calm but sharp as a knife. "I asked you a simple question, ma'am. Why can't I have the meal I requested when I booked this ticket?" Grace's throat felt tight. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The other passengers were starting to turn around, craning their necks to see what was happening. Some pulled out their phones. I told you," Grace stammered, her voice shaking. "That meal it's reserved for other passengers." "Other passengers?" The girl, Chloe Adams, according to the passenger manifest, tilted her head slightly. "I paid for a first-class ticket. I pre-ordered the grilled salmon with asparagus 3 days ago. You have it right there on your cart. Why can't I have it?" Grace's mind raced. She could see the salmon dish sitting right there, still covered in its silver dome. She'd served 2 other passengers already. But something inside her, something dark and twisted from years ago, made her feet feel like they were cemented to the floor. "I'm sorry, but..." "Are you really sorry?" Chloe's voice remained steady, but her eyes showed something else. Not anger exactly, more like disappointment mixed with understanding. The kind of understanding that came from experiencing the situation before. "Or are you sorry that everyone's watching?" An older white woman in seat 1C spoke up. "Oh, for heaven's sake, just give the child her meal. What's the problem?" Grace felt sweat forming on her forehead. The cabin suddenly felt too hot, too small. Why couldn't she just give the girl the meal? Why was her hand refusing to reach for it? Because every time she looked at Chloe, she didn't see a 16-year-old passenger. She saw someone else. Someone from 13 years ago. Someone who had made her high school years a living nightmare. "Miss Morgan." The captain's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Is there a problem?" Grace touched her ear, about to respond, when Chloe stood up slowly. The girl wasn't tall, maybe 5'5", but somehow she seemed to fill the entire cabin with her presence. "Let me make this very clear," Chloe said, her voice still calm but carrying a weight that made even the whispered conversation stop. "My name is Chloe Adams. My mother is Victoria Adams, CEO of Tech Vision Industries. We're based in Houston, and we employ over 15,000 people. My mother doesn't know I'm calling her right now, but I think she needs to hear about the service on this airline." Grace's stomach dropped. Tech Vision Industries. She'd heard of it. Everyone in Houston had. It was one of the biggest technology companies in the South, worth billions. Chloe pulled out her phone, her finger hovering over a contact labeled Mom's Sparkling Heart. "Wait!" Grace blurted out, finally finding her voice. But it came out too loud, too desperate. You can't do that." "Can't do what?" Chloe asked, her eyebrow raised. "Call my mother? I'm pretty sure I can. Or are you going to deny me that too?" The entire first-class cabin was silent now. Even the hum of the airplane engines seemed quieter. A businessman in seat 3B had his phone out, recording. A young couple across the aisle watched with their mouths open. "That meal it's not appropriate for," Grace tried to say, but the words caught her throat. What was she about to say? Not appropriate for who? Not appropriate for what? Not appropriate for me? Chloe finished the sentence, her voice dropping lower. "Is that what you were going to say, Miss Morgan? Not appropriate for me, because of what exactly?" Grace's hand started shaking harder. The meal cart rattled slightly. "I think we both know what this is about," Chloe continued. "I've dealt with this my whole life. The looks, the assumptions, the little ways people try to make you feel like you don't belong, even when you've paid for every right to be there. But I'm tired of being quiet about it." "No, Grace tried to interrupt, but her voice cracked. "My mother taught me something important," Chloe said, looking directly into Grace's eyes. "She told me that silence in the face of discrimination isn't peace. It's permission. Permission for it to keep happening. To me, to other kids who look like me, to everyone who gets treated differently because of how they look. Chloe's finger moved closer to her phone screen. So I'm going to call my mother now, and she's going to call her lawyers, and those lawyers are going to call the airline, and we're going to have a very long conversation about training and hiring and what it means to provide equal service to everyone, regardless of what they look like. Please, Grace whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. Please don't. I can't. You can't what? Chloe asked. Can't do your job? Can't treat me like every other passenger? Can't see past whatever problem you have with me? The captain's voice came through the intercom, addressing all passengers. Folks, we're going to need everyone to remain calm. We'll be landing in Houston in approximately 45 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare for her. But Grace didn't hear the rest. Her vision was starting to blur. The cabin was spinning, because when she looked at Chloe, she didn't just see the girl in front of her anymore. She saw the hallway of Jefferson High School in Houston. She saw her locker covered in cruel words. She saw a group of girls laughing at her, led by a black girl with the same confident stance, the same unshakable presence. She saw Keisha Williams, the girl who had destroyed her, the girl who looked so much like Chloe that it made Grace's chest ache with old pain. And suddenly, Grace was 16 again, crying in the bathroom, wondering why she wasn't good enough, why they hated her so much, why every day felt like a battle just to survive. Miss Morgan? Chloe's voice cut through the memory. Are you okay? But Grace wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay for 13 years. And as Chloe's finger touched the screen to call her mother, Grace realized with terrible clarity that everything was about to fall apart. The phone rang once, twice. Then a woman's voice answered, powerful and clear even to the phone speaker. Chloe? Honey, you're supposed to be on a flight. Is everything all right? Chloe never broke eye contact with Grace as she spoke. Mom, we need to talk about this airline. And we need to talk about it right now. Grace Morgan had always been shy. Even as a little girl, she preferred to stay quiet, to blend into the background, to never draw attention to herself. Her mother said it was because she was sensitive, that she felt things more deeply than other children. But in high school, being sensitive was like wearing a target on your back. Jefferson High School in Houston was big. Over 2,000 students spread across a sprawling campus with buildings that always smelled like floor wax and cafeteria food. Grace was a sophomore, thin and pale with mousy brown hair that never seemed to style, right no matter how much time she spent on it. She'd had friends in middle school, good friends. But high school changed things. Groups formed and hardened like concrete, and Grace found herself on the outside looking in. It started small. A group of girls, popular girls, the kind who seemed to glide through the hallways with confidence Grace could only dream of, started sitting near her at lunch. At first, Grace thought maybe they want to be friends. She smiled at them, tried to join their conversations. But then she noticed the looks, the whispers, the way they'd laugh when she walked past. The leader of the group was Keisha Williams. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. She was black, with flawless dark skin that seemed to glow, and she carried herself like she owned the world. She was smart, too. President of the student council, captain of the debate team, the kind of girl who seemed perfect at everything. And for some reason Grace never understood, Keisha Williams decided to make her life miserable. It started with small comments. Nice shirt, Grace. Did you get it from the thrift store? Why do you walk like that? You look like a baby deer learning to use its legs. Does anyone else smell something weird? Oh, wait, it's just Grace. The other girls in Keisha's group, 3 other girls who followed Keisha everywhere, would laugh. And soon, other students started laughing too. Because when the popular kids decide someone is worth mocking, everyone else joins in to avoid becoming the next target. Grace tried to ignore it. Her mother told her to rise above it, that words can't hurt you if you don't let them. But her mother had never been 16 and eating lunch alone in a bathroom stall, because you couldn't face the cafeteria. The bullying got worse. One day, Grace arrived at her locker to find it covered in sticky notes. Dozens of them. Each one had a cruel message written in different handwriting. Keisha had gotten other students to participate. Nobody likes you. You're so weird. Why don't you just transfer schools? Your voice is so annoying. Even the teachers think you're pathetic. Grace stood there, frozen, as students walked past. Some looked sympathetic, but kept moving. Others snickered. A few took pictures. And Keisha stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, watching with a small smile on her face. Grace wanted to cry, but she wouldn't give Keisha the satisfaction. She carefully pulled down each sticky note, folded them up, and threw them away. Then she went to class like nothing had happened. But something inside her had changed that day. Something had broken. The worst part wasn't even the bullying itself. It was that Grace never knew why. She'd never done anything to Keisha, never said an unkind word, never competed for the same position, or the same boy, or the same anything. One day, during gym class, Grace finally got the courage to ask. They were in the locker room, and most of the other girls had already left. Grace saw Keisha at her locker and walked over, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. "Keisha," she said softly. Keisha turned, surprised to see Grace standing there. For just a moment, her usual confident mask slipped, and Grace saw something else underneath. Something almost like guilt, but then the mask was back. "What do you want, Grace?" Grace swallowed hard. "I just want to know why. Why you hate me so much. What did I do to you?" Keisha stared at her for a long moment. The locker room was quiet except for the drip of a shower someone had left running. "You really don't know?" Keisha finally asked. "No," Grace whispered. "I don't." Keisha laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You don't do anything, Grace. That's the problem. You just exist. You walk around with your sad face and your quiet voice, and you make everyone feel sorry for you. But you know what? Some of us don't have the luxury of being pathetic. Some of us have to be strong every single day, because if we show one moment of weakness, everyone will jump on us." Grace shook her head, confused. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't," Keisha snapped. "You don't understand what it's like to have to be perfect, to have people expect you to fail, to work twice as hard just to be seen as half as good. You get to be weak and fragile, and everyone wants to protect you. But girls like me, we have to be unbreakable. And seeing you just existing like that, being weak and getting sympathy for it, it makes me angry." Grace felt tears starting to form. "That's not fair. You don't know anything about my life. And you don't know anything about mine," Keisha shot back. "So maybe we're even." Keisha grabbed her bag and walked toward the exit. But at the door, she paused and looked back. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I don't actually hate you, Grace. I can't stand what you represent." Then she was gone, leaving Grace alone in the locker room, more confused and hurt than ever. The bullying continued for the rest of that year. Grace became a ghost in the hallways, invisible by choice. She stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria. She stopped participating in class. She stopped trying to make friends. And deep inside, something cold and hard formed in her heart. A wall made of all the pain and humiliation and loneliness. A wall that said, never again. Never again would she let someone like Keisha Williams, someone confident and beautiful and black, make her feel small. It was wrong. She knew it was wrong. But pain has a way of twisting things inside you, making you build your walls out of all the wrong materials. By senior year, Keisha had graduated early and moved away, some fancy scholarship to a university out of state. Grace heard she was doing amazing things, that she'd probably be successful and important someday. And Grace stayed behind, nursing her wounds, letting them fester instead of heal. She never told anyone about the bullying. She never reported Keisha. She just carried it, like a heavy stone she couldn't put down. The memory shattered as Victoria Adams's voice came through the phone speaker again, sharper now. "Chloe, what's happening? Talk to me." Grace snapped back to reality. The cabin. The plane. Chloe standing there with the phone. But all Grace could see was Keisha. All she could feel was that old humiliation rising up like bile in her throat. "Mrs. Adams," Chloe said calmly, "I'm on flight 2847 to Houston. I'm in first class, seat 2A, and the flight attendant, Miss Grace Morgan, has refused to give me the meal I pre-ordered and paid for. She's given it to other passengers, but not to me. She what? Victoria's voice cut through the air like a whip. Grace felt her knees go weak. No, that's not. I didn't. She won't even give me a reason, Chloe continued. Every time I ask, she just stares at me like I've done something wrong, like I don't belong here. Put her on the phone, Victoria demanded. Right now. Chloe held out the phone toward Grace. Grace looked at it like it was a snake about to strike. The businessman in 3B was still recording. The old woman in 1C shook her head in disgust. Other passengers whispered to each other. And somewhere in the back of the plane, another flight attendant, Mark, a kind older man who'd always been nice to Grace, appeared at the galley entrance, his face full of concern. Grace, he said gently, what's going on? But Grace couldn't answer, because she was 16 again and Keisha Williams was destroying her life, and everyone was watching and nobody was helping, and she was so angry, so hurt, so lost. Miss Morgan. Victoria Adams's voice came through the phone speaker, firm and controlled. This is Victoria Adams. I want you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever is happening on that plane right now, whatever issue you have with my daughter, we're going to resolve it. But first, I need to understand what's going on. Can you please explain to me why you won't serve my daughter the meal she ordered? Grace's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because how could she explain? How could she tell the successful, powerful woman that she couldn't serve her daughter because looking at Chloe reminded her of the worst time in her life, that she'd carried her trauma like poison for 13 years, and it had finally infected something it shouldn't have? How could she admit that she'd become the very thing she'd always hated? Someone who judged others based on surface-level characteristics. Someone who let their pain turn into prejudice. Grace whispered, I can't. I'm sorry I can't. And then, to everyone's shock, Grace dropped the meal cart, turned, and ran toward the back of the plane. Behind her, chaos erupted. Passengers shouted. Mark called after her. And through it all, Chloe Adams stood there with her phone, her face a mixture of confusion, anger, and something else. Something that looked almost like pity. Because while everyone else saw a racist flight attendant running away from consequences, Chloe, who'd spent her whole life reading people, understanding the subtle language of pain and trauma, saw something else. She saw someone broken. And as the plane began its descent toward Houston, with Grace hiding in the rear galley and Victoria Adams already making phone calls that would change everything, Chloe made a decision. She wasn't going to just let this go. But she wasn't going to handle it the way everyone expected either. Because maybe, just maybe, there was more to this story than anyone realized. The plane touched down at Houston International Airport 43 minutes later. And waiting at the gate was a team that would ensure Grace Morgan's actions had consequences she never could have imagined. The wheels of Flight 2847 hit the runway with a thud that made Grace flinch. She sat huddled in the rear galley, her knees pulled up to her chest, mascara streaking down her face in dark rivers. She'd been crying for the entire descent, quiet, hiccuping sobs that she tried to muffle with her hands. Mark, the senior flight attendant, had tried talking to her 3 times. Each time, Grace just shook her head and turned away. What could she possibly say? How could she explain the mess she created? Through the thin galley curtain, she could hear the passengers gathering their belongings. The usual sound of a landing. Overhead bins clicking open, people stretching, conversation starting up again. But there was something else, too. An undercurrent of whispers, sharper than usual. Did you see that? I got the whole thing on video. That poor girl. Can you believe how she was treated? Someone said her mother is a CEO. A billionaire or something. This is going viral for sure. Grace pressed her palms against her eyes. Viral. The word made her stomach twist. In 2025, nothing stayed private. Every mistake, every bad moment, every lapse in judgment could be spread across the entire world in minutes. The captain's voice came over the intercom, artificially cheerful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Houston International Airport. Local time is 3:47 p.m., and the temperature is a beautiful 72 degrees. On behalf of the entire crew, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. Grace almost laughed. Thank you for flying with us. After what had just happened, she doubted anyone in first class would ever fly this airline again. Mark appeared at the galley entrance again. His face was kind but serious. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen everything in 30 years of flying. "Grace," he said softly, "you need to come out. The passengers are deplaning." "I can't," Grace whispered. "Mark, I can't face them." "You don't have a choice, honey. The gate agents are asking for you." And he paused, looking uncomfortable. "There are some people waiting at the gate. From corporate." Grace's blood ran cold. "Corporate?" Victoria Adams called the airline's main office during the flight. They sent a team. Mark's voice was gentle but firm. "Grace, what happened up there?" "That's not like you." Grace wanted to tell him. Mark had always been kind to her, like a protective uncle. But how could she make him understand? How could she explain that she let a 13-year-old wound control her actions today? "I messed up," she finally said. "I messed up really bad, Mark." "Then you need to face it," he replied. "Running and hiding won't make it better. Come on, I'll walk with you." Grace slowly stood up, her legs shaky. She caught her reflection in the galley's metal surface. Red eyes, smeared makeup, wrinkled uniform. She looked exactly how she felt. Destroyed. The plane was nearly empty now. Most passengers had already left, eager to get away from the drama. But as Grace and Mark walked the cabin toward the exit, she saw Chloe Adams still sitting in seat 2A. The teenage girl was on her phone, typing something. She looked up as Grace approached, and their eyes met. Grace expected to see anger, hatred even, but Chloe's expression was unreadable. She studied Grace for a long moment, then looked back at her phone without saying a word. Somehow, that silence was worse than any angry words could have been. Grace and Mark stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge. The walk to the gate felt like a journey to her own execution. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear in her ears. As they entered the gate area, Grace saw them immediately, for people in dark business suits stood near the desk. 3 men and 1 woman, all holding tablets and briefcases. They had the sharp, efficient look of corporate executives, the kind of people who dealt with problems quickly and without mercy. But it was the woman standing slightly apart from them that made Grace's breath catch. Victoria Adams. She was tall, maybe 5'9", with dark skin that seemed to glow even under the harsh airport lighting. Her hair was styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders, and she wore a burgundy suit that probably cost more than Grace's car. She was beautiful, powerful, and absolutely terrifying in that moment. Victoria was on her phone, speaking in low, controlled tones. When she saw Chloe emerge from the jet bridge behind Grace and Mark, her expression softened just slightly. "I'll call you back," Victoria said into her phone, then ended the call. She walked toward her daughter, heels clicking on the tile floor with sharp precision. "Mom," Chloe said, and suddenly she sounded like what she was, a 16-year-old girl who'd just been through something difficult. "You didn't have to come to the airport." "Yes, I did," Victoria replied firmly. She pulled Chloe into a tight hug, and for a moment, the powerful soul was just a mother making sure her child was okay. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Chloe assured her. "Honestly, I'm fine. It was just frustrating." Victoria pulled back and looked at her daughter carefully, the way mothers do when they're checking for invisible injuries. Satisfied that Chloe was truly okay, she turned toward Grace. The temperature in the gate area seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You must be Grace Morgan," Victoria said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it, the voice of someone used to being in charge, used to getting results. Grace couldn't speak. She just nodded. One of the corporate executives, a thin man with glasses, stepped forward. "Miss Morgan, I'm David Chun, Senior Vice President of Customer Relations. We need to have a conversation about what happened on that flight. Immediately." "There's a conference room reserved," added the woman in the suit. "If you'll follow us." Grace felt like she was moving through water as they led her away from the gate. Mark tried to comfort her, but Davidson shook his head. "Just Miss Morgan, please. We'll speak with the rest of the crew, separately." Grace glanced back and saw Chloe watching her. Victoria had her arm around her daughter's shoulders, but Chloe's eyes were fixed on Grace with that same unreadable expression. The conference room was small and sterile. White walls, a plain table, uncomfortable chairs. The kind of room where bad news was delivered. Grace sat on one side of the table. The four executives sat across from her like a jury. Victoria Adams stood near the window, arms crossed, watching everything with sharp, analytical eyes. Davidson opened his tablet. "Miss Morgan, we've received a very serious complaint. Multiple passengers have submitted statements about your behavior on Flight 2847, and several have provided video evidence. Before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand the gravity of the situation." Grace nodded numbly. "According to complaints," Chin continued, "you refused to serve a pre-ordered meal to a first-class passenger, 16-year-old Chloe Adams, despite serving the same meal to other passengers. Multiple witnesses state that when Miss Adams asked why, you were unable or unwilling to provide a legitimate reason. Is this accurate?" Grace's throat felt like sandpaper. Yes, that's accurate." "Can you explain why you refused to serve her?" asked a woman executive, whose name Grace hadn't caught. This was it, the moment where Grace had to either lie or tell a truth that would destroy her. She thought about making excuses. She could say she'd been confused about the meal orders. She could claim there was some kind of mix-up with the catering. She could blame stress or fatigue or a misunderstanding. But as she looked at these powerful people staring at her, waiting for her explanation, Grace realized that lying would only make things worse. The truth was bad, but lies would be worse. Grace started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Victoria spoke the first time since entering the room. She pushed away from the window and came to stand at the end of the table, her presence filling the space. Grace couldn't look at her. She stared at her hands instead, watching them shake. "When I was in high school," Grace began, the words coming out slowly, painfully, "I was bullied, badly, for 2 years, by a girl named Keisha Williams." The room was silent. Grace could feel their confusion. What did this have to do with anything? "Keisha was black," Grace continued, forcing herself to say it. "And she was everything I wasn't. Confident, beautiful, popular, smart. She made my life hell. I never understood why. One day I asked her, and she said I made her angry because I was weak, because I got sympathy for being weak, and she had to be strong all the time." Grace's voice cracked, but she pushed on. "I carried that pain with me for 13 years. I let it grow inside me like poison. And I told myself that I'd never let someone like Keisha hurt me again. I built these walls in my mind, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. I didn't realize that my pain had turned into something ugly, into prejudice." She finally looked up at Victoria, tears streaming down her face. "When I saw your daughter today, something in my brain just broke. She reminded me so much of Keisha. The way she sat, the confidence in her voice, even some of her expressions. And all that old hurt came flooding back, and I couldn't separate Chloe from Keisha. I couldn't see her as her own person. I just saw someone who'd hurt me, and I wanted to, I don't know, take back some power? Make her feel small like I'd felt small?" Grace wiped her face with shaking hands. "I know that's not an excuse. I know what I did was wrong. It was racist. I treated your daughter differently because of the color of her skin, because my trauma made me associate black girls with pain. And there's no excuse for that. There's no justification. I took my hurt and I turned it into harm, and I hurt an innocent kid who never did anything to me." The silence in the room was deafening. David Chun and the other executives exchanged glances. They probably expected denial, excuses, and defensiveness, not this raw, painful confession. Victoria Adams studied Grace with an expression that was impossible to read. She walked slowly around the table until she was standing directly in front of Grace. "Look at me," Victoria said firmly. Grace forced herself to meet Victoria's eyes. Do you know what my daughter has dealt with in her life? Victoria asked. She's 16 years old. She's grown up with money and opportunity. Yes, but she's also grown up black in America. She's been followed in stores. She's had teachers assume she's not as smart as her white classmates. She's had people ask if she's really my daughter because her skin is darker than mine. She's dealt with 1,000 tiny cuts that add up to deep wounds. Victoria's voice remained controlled, but Grace could hear the emotion underneath. And you know what I taught her? I taught her to be strong, to be confident, to never apologize for taking up space in a world that constantly tells black children, especially black girls, to make themselves smaller. I taught her to speak up when she's treated unfairly, because silence is how injustice continues. Grace felt fresh tears falling. So when you looked at my daughter today, Victoria continued, and you saw someone who reminded you of your pain, you weren't just refusing her a meal. You were punishing her for being confident, for being unapologetic, for being everything you were told was wrong. But everything I've taught her is right. I know, Grace whispered. I know, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it, Victoria said sharply. Then she paused, seeming to struggle with something internally. But at least you're being honest. At least you're not making excuses or pretending this was just a mistake. That's something. David Chin cleared his throat. Miss Morgan, based on your admission, we have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately. You'll be escorted out of the airport after this meeting. Your final paycheck and any benefits information will be mailed to your home address. You're also banned from flying with this airline in the future, as either an employee or a passenger. Grace nodded. She'd expected this. She deserved this. Additionally, Chin continued, we'll be reviewing the hiring and training procedures that allowed this situation to occur. Every member of the crew on Flight 2847 will undergo mandatory anti-discrimination training, and we'll be implementing new protocols for reporting and addressing bias. That's not enough, Victoria said, cutting him off. She turned to face the executives. My lawyers will be in touch with your legal department. We'll be discussing appropriate compensation for the emotional distress caused to my daughter, as well as a much larger conversation about systemic changes within your airline. Mrs. Adams, Chin began, we're prepared to offer. I don't want to hear your offers right now, Victoria interrupted. I want actions, real, meaningful changes, not just sensitivity training that people sit through while playing on their phones. Real accountability measures, real diversity in your hiring, real consequences for discrimination. She pulled a business card from her suit pocket and placed it on the table. Have your CEO call me directly. Not tomorrow. Today. Within the next 2 hours. If I don't hear from them, my next call will be to the media. The executives looked uncomfortable, but nodded. Victoria turned back to Grace. For a long moment, she just looked at her, really looked at her, like she was trying to understand something. I believe you when you say you're sorry, Victoria finally said. I believe that you didn't wake up this morning planning to discriminate against a teenager. But intention doesn't erase impact. Your pain is real. Your trauma is real. But you used it as a weapon against my child, and that's unforgivable. I know, Grace said brokenly. I know it is. Get help, Victoria advised, her voice softening just slightly. Get therapy. Deal with your trauma properly. Because right now, you're not just hurting others, you're hurting yourself. You're letting what happened to you 13 years ago control your life. That's no way to live. Grace couldn't respond. She could barely breathe. Victoria walked to the door, then paused and looked back. Keisha Williams, she said thoughtfully. The girl who bullied you. Where is she now? Grace shook her head. I don't know. Last I heard, she got some scholarship and left Houston. She's probably successful somewhere. She was always smart. Maybe she is successful, Victoria said. Or maybe she's struggling with her own demons. Maybe she spent years regretting how she treated you. Maybe she learned and grew and became a better person. Or maybe she didn't. Either way, she's not here. She's not in your life. But you're still letting her control you. Victoria opened the door. I hope you figure out how to let her go, Grace. for your own sake." Then she was gone, leaving Grace alone with the executives and the ruins of her career. Outside the conference room, Chloe Adams sat in a row of airport chairs, scrolling through her phone. She'd been reading the messages pouring in. Friends who'd heard what happened, classmates asking if she was okay, even some people she didn't know sending supportive messages. But she wasn't really paying attention to any of it. Instead, she was thinking about Grace Morgan's face, that look of pure terror and pain when she'd run away. It had been bothering Chloe since it happened. She'd seen racism before. She'd dealt with microaggressions and uncomfortable moments and outright discrimination. But usually, the people doing it were either oblivious to their bias or actively malicious. They either didn't realize what they were doing was wrong, or they knew and didn't care. But Grace Morgan had looked broken, like she was battling something inside herself that she couldn't control. It didn't excuse what she'd done. Chloe was very clear about that in her mind. But it made her curious. Her mother emerged from the conference room, looking tired but satisfied. She sat down next to Chloe and took her hand. "How are you feeling?" Victoria asked. "I'm okay, Mom," Chloe assured her. "Really, it was uncomfortable, but I'm okay." "You handled yourself well on that plane," Victoria said with a mix of pride and sadness. "You stayed calm. You stood up for yourself. But you shouldn't have had to. You're 16. You should be worried about homework and friends and what to wear to school, not about fighting discrimination." "I know," Chloe said quietly. "But this is the world we live in, right? You taught me that. You taught me to be prepared, to stand up, to not let people get away with treating me as less than." Victoria squeezed her hand. "I did, and I'm proud of you. But I hate that I had to teach you those things so young." They sat in silence for a moment, watching travelers rush past with rolling suitcases and coffee cups. "Mom," Chloe said finally, "what happened in there?" With the flight attendant. Victoria considered how much to share. She was fired, and she admitted what she did was wrong. She had a reason. Not an excuse, but a reason. She was bullied in high school by a black girl, and she never dealt with that trauma properly. When she saw you, something in her mind connected you to her bully, and she acted on that. Chloe processed this information. So she was racist because someone hurt her? "It's more complicated than that," Victoria said carefully. "Pain can make people build walls in their minds. Sometimes those walls are built with the wrong materials. Fear, anger, prejudice. She let her pain turn into something toxic instead of dealing with it properly. That doesn't make what she did okay, but it does make it human. Sadly, horribly human." Chloe nodded slowly. "Is she going to be okay?" Victoria looked at her daughter with surprise. "Are you worried about her?" "I don't know," Chloe admitted. "Part of me is really angry. Part of me wants her to suffer consequences. But another part of me just feels sad. For her. For whatever happened to her that made her like this." "That empathy is beautiful," Victoria said softly. "But don't let it make you forget that you were the one hurt today. You were the victim of her trauma, becoming your problem. Your compassion is admirable, but you don't owe her anything." "I know," Chloe said. I keep thinking about what you always tell me, about how hurt people. And I wonder if maybe this whole thing could be something more than just punishment." Victoria studied her daughter, seeing the wheels turning in that brilliant 16-year-old mind. "What are you thinking, Chloe?" Before Chloe could answer, David Chin emerged from the conference room, followed by the other executives. Grace Morgan came last, escorted by airport security. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the weight of what happened had physically shrunk her. As they passed, Grace's eyes found Chloe's. For just a second, they looked at each other, the woman who'd caused harm and the girl who'd been harmed. Grace mouthed two words, "I'm sorry." Chloe didn't respond. She just watched as Grace was led away toward the airport exit, toward whatever came next in her life. Victoria watched this exchange with interest. She knew her daughter well enough to recognize when Chloe was working through something important. "Mom," Chloe said slowly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you deal with problems at your company, when someone makes a mistake or does something wrong? Do you always just fire them? Or do you sometimes try to fix things? Victoria raised an eyebrow. It depends on the situation. Why? Chloe took a deep breath. Because I have an idea. And you're probably going to think it's crazy. But I want you to hear me out. Victoria settled back in her chair, giving her daughter her full attention. I'm listening. Grace sat in the back seat of her old Honda Civic in the employee parking lot, still wearing her wrinkled flight attendant uniform. She'd been fired 3 hours ago, escorted out of the airport like a criminal, and now she couldn't bring herself to drive home. What would she do when she got there? Face her empty apartment? Call her mother and explain what happened? Start searching for new jobs, knowing that no airline would hire her after this? Her phone had been buzzing constantly. Text messages from co-workers who'd heard what happened. A voicemail from her landlord about next month's rent. Notifications from social media. Apparently, someone had posted about the incident and it was spreading. Grace turned her phone off. She couldn't deal with any of it. She leaned her head against the steering wheel and let herself cry again. Deep, gasping sobs that made her whole body shake. She cried for the job she'd lost, for the person she'd become, for that scared 16-year-old girl who still lived inside her, still hurting after all these years. She cried for Chloe Adams, who just wanted a meal she'd paid for, and instead got treated like she didn't belong. Grace's phone buzzed once more before the power finally died. She didn't bother checking what it was. She sat there as the sun began to set, painting the parking lot in shades of orange and pink. Other airline employees came and went, getting into their cars to head home after their shifts. A few glanced at Grace's car, but nobody approached. Word had probably spread about what she'd done. Finally, as darkness fell, Grace started her car. She had to go home eventually, had to face reality eventually. But as she pulled out of the parking spot, she had no idea that reality was about to take a very unexpected turn. Victoria Adams stood in her home office, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Houston skyline. Her house, a modern architectural masterpiece in the upscale River Oaks neighborhood, was quiet. Her husband Robert was traveling for work, and her younger son Marcus was at basketball practice. It was just her and Chloe tonight. Victoria had spent the past hour on phone calls, with her lawyers, discussing the lawsuit against the airline, with her PR team, managing the story that was starting to spread online, with the airline CEO, who called exactly 90 minutes after Victoria's ultimatum, stammering apologies and promising immediate action. She'd been tough, demanded real changes, made it clear that this wasn't just about her daughter. It was about every passenger who'd ever been discriminated against on their flights. But now, standing in her office with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, Victoria felt tired. Tired of fighting these battles. Tired of having to teach her children how to navigate a world that sometimes seemed determined to make things harder for them. Tired of being strong all the time. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mom!" Chloe poked her head in. "Can we talk about my idea now?" Victoria turned from the window. "Your crazy idea that I'm supposed to hear out?" "That's the one," Chloe said with a small smile. Victoria gestured to the leather couch. "All right, let's hear it." Chloe sat down, tucking her legs under her. She'd changed out of her travel clothes into comfortable sweats and a t-shirt, her braids pulled back in a ponytail. She looked so young in that moment, just a kid, really, despite all the maturity she'd shown earlier. "So," Chloe began, "I've been thinking about Grace Morgan, about what happened and why it happened." "Chloe," Victoria started, a warning in her voice. "Just listen, Mom, please." Victoria sighed but nodded. "You said she was bullied by a black girl in high school, and she never dealt with that trauma. So it festered and turned into prejudice. Right?" "That's what she said, yes." "And now she's been fired. Her life is basically ruined, and she's probably going to spend the next few years struggling and being angry and letting that trauma get even worse," Chloe continued. "Which means she's not going to get better. She's going to get worse." "Where are you going with this?" Victoria asked carefully. Chloe leaned forward. "What if we gave her a chance to actually heal? What if instead of just punishing her, we help her understand why what she did was wrong and gave her the tools to be better? Victoria stared at her daughter in disbelief. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting we hire her. Absolutely not, Victoria said immediately, standing up from the couch. Chloe, that's no. Just no. Hear me out. Chloe insisted, not to work directly with customers or anything. But Mom, your company has over 15,000 employees. You have training programs, diversity initiatives, HR departments. What if Grace Morgan became part of that? What if she had to face her prejudice head-on, learn about the harm it causes, and maybe, just maybe, become someone who could help prevent others from making the same mistakes? Victoria paced across the office. Chloe, this woman discriminated against you. She treated you as less than because of the color of your skin, and you want to reward her with a job at my company. It's not a reward, Chloe argued. It would be the hardest thing she's ever done. Think about it. She had come to work every day at a company owned by a black woman, surrounded by diverse employees, forced to confront everything that scares her. She'd have to do intensive training, therapy, education. She'd have to prove she could change. And if she can't, Victoria challenged, if she's just a racist person who will never change, then we've wasted time and resources on someone who hurt my child. Then we fire her, Chloe said simply. But at least we tried. At least we gave her a chance that nobody else will. Victoria shook her head, but she was listening now. Really listening. Mom, you always tell me that change doesn't happen through punishment alone. You say it happens through education and opportunity and accountability. You built your entire company on that philosophy, giving people chances, helping them grow, creating opportunities for people who might not get them elsewhere. That's different, Victoria protested weakly. Is it? Chloe asked. You've hired people with criminal records, people who dropped out of school, people who were told they'd never amount to anything. You gave them structure and support and expectations, and a lot of them became your best employees. Why can't Grace Morgan be another one of those stories? Victoria sat back down, her mind racing. Everything in her mother instinct screamed to protect her daughter, to make sure Grace Morgan faced maximum consequences for what she'd done. But her CEO instincts, the ones that had built $1 billion company from nothing, saw something else, an opportunity. A chance to prove that restorative justice could work even in the hardest cases. You understand that she would have to agree to very strict conditions? Victoria said slowly. Mandatory therapy, diversity training, regular evaluations. One mistake and she's out. I understand, Chloe said. And you understand that people might criticize us for this? They might think we're being too soft or that we're excusing racism. I understand that too. But Mom, you've never worried about what people think when you know you're doing the right thing. Victoria looked at her daughter, seeing not just a smart 16-year-old, but the woman she was becoming. Compassionate, but not naive. Strong, but not cruel. Willing to be uncomfortable if it meant creating real change. When did you get so wise? Victoria asked softly. I had a pretty good teacher, Chloe replied with a smile. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, thinking through all the implications. Finally, she pulled out her phone. What are you doing? Chloe asked. Calling my head of HR. If we're going to do this, Victoria replied, and I'm still not 100% convinced we should. We're going to do it right, with oversight, accountability, and very clear expectations. Chloe's face lit up. Really? You're actually considering it? I'm considering presenting the option to Grace Morgan, Victoria clarified. But Chloe, listen to me very carefully. She has to want this. She has to be willing to do the hard work of changing. We can't force someone to be better. They have to choose it themselves. I know, Chloe said seriously, but we can give her the choice. That's more than most people would do. Victoria dialed the number. As it rang, she looked at her daughter and shook her head in amazement. You know what the hardest part of being your mother is? Victoria asked. What? Realizing that sometimes you're wiser than I am. Grace finally made it home around 9 p.m. Her apartment was dark and cold. She'd forgotten to turn the heat on before her flight that morning, back when her biggest worry was whether she'd packed the right shoes. That felt like a lifetime ago now. She dropped her keys on the counter and stood in the darkness, too tired to even turn on the lights. Her phone was still dead. She should charge it, should check her messages, should start dealing with the aftermath of her life falling apart. But instead, she walked to her bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. Who was she? Really? She'd always thought of herself as a good person. Kind, quiet, someone who just wanted to live her life without causing trouble. But today had proven that wasn't true. Today had shown her that somewhere deep inside, she'd been carrying poison. Hatred disguised as self-protection, prejudice dressed up as survival instinct. Grace thought about what Victoria Adams had said. Get help. Deal with your trauma properly. She'd never dealt with what happened in high school. Not really. She just buried it, told herself to move on, pretended that ignoring the pain would make it go away. But pain doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It transforms. It mutates. It seeps out in ways you don't expect, hurting people who don't deserve it. People like Chloe Adams. Grace turned away from the mirror. She couldn't look at herself anymore. She was reaching for a phone charger when she heard a knock at her door. Grace froze. Who would be knocking at this hour? Had the media found her address? Were reporters waiting outside? The knock came again, firmer this time. Grace reluctantly walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, professionally dressed, holding a tablet. She didn't look like a reporter. Who is it? Grace called through the door. Miss Morgan? My name is Patricia Williams. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources for Tech Vision Industries. Mrs. Adams sent me to speak with you. Grace's heart stopped. Tech Vision Industries. Victoria Adams's company. Were they here to serve her with a lawsuit? To make sure she understood the full extent of the trouble she was in? With shaking hands, Grace opened the door. Patricia Williams was a black woman in her 40s, with short natural hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. She smiled gently at Grace. May I come in? I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. Grace stepped aside, too confused to refuse. Patricia entered and glanced around the small apartment, taking the worn furniture, the bare walls, the general sense of someone just existing rather than living. I know this is unexpected, Patricia began, and I know you've had the worst day of your life. But Mrs. Adams sent me here with a proposition, one that you're free to refuse, but I think you should at least hear it. Grace found her voice. A proposition? I don't understand. I thought she hated me. I thought she was going to sue me. She might still sue the airline, Patricia said honestly. But this isn't about legal action. This is about something else. May we sit down? Grace led her to the small living room. They sat on opposite ends of the couch. Grace perched nervously on the edge, Patricia relaxed and professional. Miss Morgan, do you believe people can change? Patricia asked. The question caught Grace off guard. I don't know. I'd like to think so. Mrs. Adams believes people can change, Patricia continued. She built her entire company on that belief. Tech Vision Industries employs thousands of people, many of whom came from difficult circumstances. People with criminal records, people who struggled with addiction, people who made mistakes and needed a second chance. Grace listened, confused about where this was going. Her daughter, Chloe, has proposed something unusual, Patricia said. She believed that you could change, that with the right support, education, and accountability, you could become someone who not only understands the harm you cause, but actively works to prevent others from causing similar harm. I don't understand, Grace whispered. Patricia leaned forward. She wanted to offer you a job. Grace stared at her, certain she'd misheard. A job? A conditional job, Patricia clarified, with very strict requirements. But yes, a position in our diversity and inclusion department. You would be working on training programs, helping develop curriculum, and eventually, if you prove yourself, possibly sharing your story to educate others about how prejudice develops and how to combat it. Grace felt like the room was spinning. This has to be a joke. Why would they offer me anything? I discriminated against their daughter. That's exactly why, Patricia said. Because Chloe Adams believes that punishment alone doesn't create change. She believes that you need help, not just consequences. And her mother, despite every instinct telling her to protect her child by destroying you, is willing to give you that help. Grace shook her head, tears forming again. I don't deserve this. No, you don't, Patricia agreed bluntly. And that's kind of the point. Grace, second chances aren't given to people who deserve them. They're given to people who need them. The question is, are you willing to do the work? What work? Grace asked. Patricia pulled out her tablet and brought up a document. If you accept this offer, here's what would be required. First, immediate enrollment in intensive therapy, twice a week minimum, with a licensed therapist who specializes in trauma and prejudice. You would have to confront what happened to you in high school and why you let it turn into racism. Grace nodded slowly, trying to process everything. Second, Patricia continued, you would complete a 6-month training program on diversity, equity, and inclusion. You would learn about the history of racism in America, about implicit bias, about the harm caused by discrimination. You would have to write reflection papers, engage in difficult conversations, and really examine your own beliefs. Okay, Grace said quietly. Third, you would be on probation for 1 full year. Any hint of discriminatory behavior, any failure to meet expectations, any indication that you're not genuinely committed to change, you're terminated immediately. No second chances after the second chance. I understand. Fourth, Patricia said, her voice becoming more serious, you would have to apologize to Chloe Adams, directly, in person, and it would have to be genuine. If she doesn't believe you're sincere, this offer is off the table. Grace's stomach clenched. Face Chloe again? Tell her directly how sorry she was? The thought was terrifying. But maybe that was the point. And finally, Patricia concluded, you would have to be willing to eventually share your story. Not right away, only after you've done the work and genuinely changed. But eventually, you would talk about what happened, how prejudice develops, and how you overcame it. You would become an example of what accountability and growth look like. Patricia set down her tablet and looked at Grace directly. This wouldn't be easy. In fact, it would probably be the hardest thing you've ever done. You would be working for a black woman in a diverse company, constantly confronted with everything that makes you uncomfortable. You would have to face your demons every single day. And there would be people, both inside and outside the company, who would think you don't deserve this opportunity. They'd be right, Grace said. I don't deserve it. Maybe not, Patricia agreed. But Chloe Adams believes you could earn it. The question is, do you believe you can earn it? Grace was quiet for a long time. She thought about the scared 16-year-old she'd been, about Keisha Williams and all the pain from high school, about how she'd let that pain control her life for 13 years, about Chloe Adams sitting on that plane, just wanted the meal she'd paid for, and instead facing discrimination because of Grace's unhealed wounds. She thought about what Victoria had said. You're letting what happened to you 13 years ago control your life. That's no way to live. It wasn't a way to live. Grace had been surviving, not living, letting her past dictate her present, building walls instead of bridges. Maybe it was time to tear those walls down. What if I fail? Grace asked quietly. What if I try and I can't change? What if I'm too broken? Patricia's expression softened. Then at least you tried. But Grace, I don't think you're broken beyond repair. Hurt? Yes. In need of serious help? Absolutely. But not broken. The fact that you told the truth today at the airport, that you admitted what you did was wrong, that shows you're capable of growth. Grace wiped her eyes. When do I have to decide? Tonight, Patricia said. Mrs. Adams wanted an answer before morning. This is a time-sensitive offer. If you accept, you would start on Monday. If you decline, you go your separate way and they go theirs. Grace looked around her apartment. At the life she'd built, that wasn't really a life at all. At the emptiness and loneliness and pain she'd been living with, she thought about the alternative. Spending the next months or years bouncing between jobs, carrying the shame and guilt, never truly addressing what had broken inside her. Or she could take the scariest, hardest path, face her demons, Do the work. Maybe become someone better. I have one question, Grace said. What's that? Why would they really do this for me? I hurt their daughter. They could destroy me if they wanted to. Why show me mercy? Patricia smiled. Because Chloe Adams asked them to, and because Victoria Adams understands something important. That hurt people, but heal people can heal people. They're betting that if you heal, you might be able to help others heal too. Grace took a deep breath. Tell Mrs. Adams I accept. And tell Chloe. Grace's voice broke. Tell Chloe that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of the chance she's giving me. Patricia stood up and extended her hand. Welcome to Tech Vision Industries, Grace. Your real work starts now. They shook hands, and as Patricia left, Grace sat alone in her apartment, feeling something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Monday morning arrived with a kind of bright sunshine that felt almost offensive given how nervous Grace was. She'd barely slept all weekend, her mind spinning with anxiety about what was coming. She stood outside the Tech Vision Industries headquarters building, a massive glass and steel structure in downtown Houston that seemed to touch the sky. Her reflection stared back at her from the pristine windows, a 31-year-old woman in a modest gray suit she bought years ago for job interviews, clutching a leather folder like it was a life preserver. Around her, employees streamed through revolving doors. So many different faces, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, young and old, everyone moving with purpose, talking on phones, carrying coffee cups with the Tech Vision logo. Grace felt like an imposter, like at any moment someone would point at her and shout, "That's the racist from the plane. What's she doing here?" But nobody looked at her twice. To them, she was just another new employee starting her first day. If only they knew. Grace forced herself to walk through the doors. The lobby was stunning. High ceilings, modern art on the walls, a massive reception desk made of polished wood. Everything about the space said success, innovation, excellence. "Can I help you?" asked the receptionist, a young man with warm brown skin and a friendly smile. "I'm Grace Morgan. I'm supposed to meet Patricia Williams at 9 o'clock. He typed something into his computer. Yes, Miss Morgan. Ms. Williams is expecting you. Take the elevator to the 15th floor. She'll meet you there." "Thank you," Grace managed, her voice barely steady. The elevator ride felt eternal. Grace watched the numbers climb, 3, 5, 8, 12, while her heart pounded harder with each floor. What was she doing? What had she agreed to? The doors opened on the 15th floor, and Patricia Williams was waiting just as promised. She wore a deep blue suit today, and her expression was professional but not unkind. "Good morning, Grace." "Right on time. That's a good start." "Good morning," Grace replied. "Follow me. We have a lot to cover today." Patricia led her through a maze of hallways. Grace tried to take in everything. The open office spaces where people collaborated around standing desks, the small meeting rooms with glass walls, the break area with fancy coffee machines and fresh fruit. Everything was bright, modern, inclusive. Motivational posters lined the walls with messages like "Innovation through diversity" and "Every voice matters." Grace felt her stomach twist. She was entering a world that celebrated everything she discriminated against. They reached a small office at the end of a hallway. Inside was a simple desk, a computer, a bookshelf with various diversity and inclusion textbooks, and a large window overlooking Houston's skyline. "This is your office," Patricia said. Grace blinked. "My office? I thought I'd be in a cubicle or something." "You're a program coordinator in our diversity and inclusion department," Patricia explained. "That comes with an office. Don't get too comfortable, though. You'll be spending most of your time in training sessions, meetings, and eventually in the field working with different departments." Grace set her folder down on the desk, still trying to process that this was real. Patricia sat in one of the visitor chairs and gestured for Grace to sit behind the desk. "Before we go any further, I need be very clear about something. Do you know why Mrs. Adams really agreed to this arrangement?" Grace shook her head. "Because her daughter asked her to." "Yes, but also because Victoria Adams is a businesswoman first. She sees potential value in your transformation, if you actually transform. She's betting that your story, if you genuinely change and grow, could be a powerful tool for educating others about how prejudice develops and how it can be overcome. Patricia leaned forward. But make no mistake, Grace. If you fail, if you show any signs that you're not genuinely committed to this work, you won't just lose your job. You'll prove every critic right who said people like you can't change. You'll reinforce the very prejudices we're trying to fight. Do you understand the weight of that? Yes, Grace said quietly. I understand. Good. Patricia pulled out a tablet. Let's go over your schedule. Monday and Thursday evenings, you have therapy sessions with Dr. Candace Howard. She specializes in trauma recovery and racial reconciliation. She's located about 15 minutes from here, and your sessions are mandatory. Miss even one without a medical emergency, and you're terminated. Grace nodded, making mental notes. Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons, you'll be attending intensive diversity training. This isn't corporate sensitivity training, where people zone out and check their phones. This is real education, history, sociology, psychology, personal narratives. It will be uncomfortable. That's the point. I understand. Fridays, you'll have one-on-one meetings with me to discuss your progress. You'll also be keeping a daily journal about what you're learning and how you're processing it. I'll review those journals weekly. Patricia swiped to another screen. Additionally, you'll be shadowing various departments to understand how TechVision operates. You'll see our diverse workforce in action, understand how inclusion drives innovation, and learn what it looks like when a company truly values every employee. Grace felt overwhelmed, but also strangely grateful. This wasn't just a job. It was a complete restructuring of how she saw the world. Questions so far? Patricia asked. Just one, Grace said hesitantly. When do I have to apologize to Chloe? Patricia's expression became more serious. Friday afternoon. After your first week, when you've had some time to begin processing everything, Mrs. Adams and Chloe will meet you here. What you say and how you say it will determine whether you continue in this program. Grace's throat felt tight. For days. She had 4 days to prepare for the most important apology of her life. There's something else you should know, Patricia added. Not everyone here knows your full story. Most employees just know you're a new hire in the D&I department. But Mrs. Adams' executive team knows everything. So do the department heads. They're watching you, Grace. Some of them wanted her to fire you on sight instead of offering this opportunity. You'll need to prove them wrong. I will, Grace said with more confidence than she felt. I'll do whatever it takes. Patricia stood up. Then let's begin. Your first training session starts in 30 minutes. The training room was medium-sized, with tables arranged in a U-shape facing a large screen. When Grace entered, 5 other people were already there, a mix of ages and races, all looking professional but relaxed. They looked up as Grace entered, offering polite smiles and nods. Everyone, this is Grace Morgan, Patricia announced. She's joining our diversity and inclusion team. Grace, this is your cohort. You'll be going through the intensive training program together. A young black woman with beautiful locks extended her hand. Hey, Grace, I'm Jasmine. Welcome to the program. Grace shook her hand, trying not to show how anxious she was. Did Jasmine know? Did any of them know what she'd done? I'm Marcus, said a Latino man in his 40s. Good to meet you. The others introduced themselves, Robert, an older white man, Aisha, a woman in hijab who looked to be in her 30s, and David, a young Asian American man who couldn't have been older than 25. They all seemed normal, friendly, even. Grace felt her shoulders relax slightly. Patricia left, and moments later, a tall black man entered the room. He was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and the bearing of someone who commanded respect without demanding it. Good morning, everyone. For those who are new this week, I'm Dr. James Mitchell. I've been teaching this course for 5 years now, and I promise you will challenge everything you think you know about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Mitchell pulled up a slide on the screen. It showed a simple question. What is racism? Let's start with the basics, he said. Who wants to take a shot at defining racism? David raised his hand. Treating someone badly because of their race? That's prejudice, Dr. Mitchell corrected gently. Racism is prejudice plus power. It's a system that advantages some groups while disadvantaging others. Everyone with me so far? Heads nodded around the room. Dr. Mitchell clicked to the next slide, which showed a diagram, a tree with visible branches above ground and deep roots below. Most people think racism is just the obvious stuff: slurs, violence, discrimination. Those are the branches. They're visible, ugly, and everyone agrees they're wrong. But racism's real power is in the roots, the invisible systems and beliefs that feed those branches. He pointed to the roots on the diagram: implicit bias, microaggressions, systemic inequality, internalized prejudice. These are harder to see, harder to admit, and harder to change. But without addressing the roots, cutting off the branches does nothing. They just grow back. Grace stared at the diagram, something clicking in her mind. What she'd done on the plane, that was a branch. But the roots went back 13 years to a high school hallway and a girl named Keisha Williams. Everyone in this room has biases, Dr. Mitchell continued. Every single one of us. Our brains are wired to categorize, to make quick judgments, to see patterns. That's not evil, it's human. But what we do with those biases, how we acknowledge and challenge them, that's what matters. He walked around the room as he spoke, making eye contact with each person. Over the next 6 months, we're going to dig into those roots. We're going to examine history you probably didn't learn in school. We're going to discuss uncomfortable truths. We're going to challenge assumptions you might not even know you have. And it's going to be hard. Dr. Mitchell stopped in front of the screen and turned to face them all. Some of you might get defensive. Some of you might feel guilty. Some of you might want to quit. That's normal. Growth is uncomfortable. But I promise you, if you stay with it, if you do the work, you'll come out the other side as better people and better professionals. He clicked to the next slide, a schedule of topics they'd cover over the coming months. Grace's eyes scanned the list. History of racism in America, the psychology of prejudice, intersectionality, white fragility, allyship and accountability. Each topic felt like it was speaking directly to her situation. All right, Dr. Mitchell said, let's start with an exercise. I want everyone to think about a time when you witnessed or experienced discrimination. Don't share the story yet. Just sit with it. Remember how it felt. What emotions came up? The room got quiet as everyone turned inward. Grace didn't have to think hard. She had 2 memories fighting for attention in her mind. The first was obvious: being bullied by Keisha Williams. The humiliation, the fear, the helplessness of being targeted for reasons she never understood. But the second memory was fresher, more painful. Chloe Adams sitting in seat 2A, asking a simple question with dignified calm, while Grace's trauma turned into cruelty. Grace had been both the victim and the perpetrator. She'd experienced discrimination and then inflicted it on someone else. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Okay, Dr. Mitchell said after a few minutes of silence. Now I want you to think about this. Did that experience change how you see the world? Did it change how you treat others? Grace felt tears prickling at her eyes. Yes, it had changed her. It had twisted something inside her, made her build walls, made her see threats where there were none, and she let it turn her into exactly the kind of person who had hurt her. This is what trauma can do, Dr. Mitchell said softly, as if he could read Grace's thoughts. It can make us hurt others to protect ourselves. It can make us see enemies where there are only people trying to live their lives. Breaking that cycle, that's the real work. Grace raised her hand, surprising herself. Yes, Grace. What if... Grace's voice shook slightly. What if you've already hurt someone? What if you've already let your trauma turn into something harmful? Can you come back from that? The room was silent. Everyone turned to look at her, and Grace felt exposed, vulnerable. But Dr. Mitchell's expression was understanding, not judgmental. That's the question that really matters, isn't it? He said. Can people change after they've caused harm? And the answer is yes, but only if they're willing to do 3 things. He held up one finger. First, Acknowledge the harm honestly. No excuses, no justifications. Just truth. A second finger. Second, take responsibility. Not just saying I'm sorry, but actively working to repair the damage and prevent it from happening again. A third finger. Third, stay humble. Change isn't a destination, it's a journey. You don't get to decide when you've done enough. The people you've harmed get to decide when they're ready to trust you again. If they ever are. Grace nodded, absorbing every word like it was medicine she desperately needed. The fact that you're asking that question, Dr. Mitchell added, tells me you're already on the right path. The people who can't change are the ones who never ask it. The day passed in a blur of information, exercises, and difficult conversations. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, Grace's brain felt like it had been turned inside out and examined under a microscope. She returned to her office, exhausted but strangely energized. Her first therapy session with Dr. Howard was tomorrow evening, and her first journal entry was due by the end of the week. Grace opened her laptop and started a new document. The cursor blinked on the empty page, waiting. She started typing. Day 1 journal entry. I've spent 13 years carrying the weight of what happened to me in high school. I told myself I would protect myself, building walls so nobody could hurt me again. But today I learned something important. Walls don't just keep pain out. They trap it inside, where it grows and mutates into something poisonous. What Keisha Williams did to me was wrong. Bullying is wrong. The pain she caused was real. But what I did to Chloe Adams was also wrong. I took my pain and made it her problem. I let my trauma become her trauma. Dr. Mitchell asked us if our experiences changed how we see the world. Mine did. It made me see confidence in black women as a threat. It made me associate certain characteristics with danger. It made me incapable of seeing Chloe as an individual, just as a reminder of my pain. That's not okay. That's not acceptable. That's exactly the kind of prejudice I need to unlearn. I don't know if I can change completely. I don't know if the roots of my bias go too deep, but I have to try. I owe it to Chloe. I owe it to everyone I might hurt if I don't do this work. Tomorrow I start therapy. I'm terrified, but maybe being terrified is good. Maybe it means I'm finally facing the things I've been running from for 13 years. Grace stopped typing and stared at what she'd written. It was honest, raw, painful. It was a start. She saved the document just as her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Patricia. Good work today. Dr. Mitchell says you ask important questions and engage genuinely. Keep it up. Remember, Friday afternoon, you meet with Chloe and Mrs. Adams. Use the next few days wisely. Grace typed back a quick thank you and set her phone down. For days. She had 4 days to figure out how to apologize for something that couldn't really be apologized for. For days to find the words that could somehow convey how sorry she was, how much she regretted her actions, how committed she was to changing. It felt impossible. But then again, a week ago, the idea that she'd be sitting in an office at Tech Vision Industries, learning about diversity and inclusion, working for the mother of the girl she discriminated against, that had seemed impossible too. Maybe impossible things could happen after all. The week passed both too quickly and too slowly. Grace's therapy session with Dr. Candace Howard on Tuesday evening had been the most emotionally draining 3 hours of her life. Dr. Howard was a black woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle but firm approach that left no room for Grace to hide from herself. They'd talked about Keisha Williams, about high school, about the locker covered in sticky notes, and eating lunch in bathroom stalls. Dr. Howard had let Grace cry, had validated her pain, but had also pushed her to examine how she'd weaponized that pain against others. Hurt people, Dr. Howard had said, echoing Victoria Adams's words. But that's an explanation, not an excuse. Understanding why you did something harmful doesn't erase the harm itself. The diversity training sessions had been equally challenging. Dr. Mitchell had led them through the history of racism in America, topics Grace had never learned in school. The way systems were built to advantage some groups while disadvantaging others. How prejudice became encoded in laws, policies, and social norms. On Thursday, they discussed implicit bias. Dr. Mitchell had them all take a test that measured their unconscious associations, and Grace had cried when her results confirmed what she already knew. She held negative associations toward black people, particularly black women. This is progress. Dr. Mitchell had told her privately after class. You're confronting what most people deny exists. That's the first step toward change. But now it was Friday afternoon, and Grace sat in a conference room on the executive floor, waiting for Victoria and Chloe Adams to arrive. Her hands shook as she reviewed the notes she'd written. Key points she wanted to make sure she covered in her apology. Patricia sat across from her, reviewing something on her tablet. How are you feeling? Patricia asked without looking up. Terrified, Grace admitted. What if I say the wrong thing? What if Chloe can't forgive me? What if... Grace. Patricia interrupted gently, finally looking up. This isn't about getting forgiveness. This is about taking responsibility. Whether Chloe forgives you or not is her choice, not something you can control. Your job is simply to be honest and accountable. Grace nodded, trying to let that sink in. The door opened, and Grace's heart jumped into her throat. Victoria Adams entered first, wearing a sharp navy suit that somehow made her look both professional and intimidating. Her expression was neutral, not hostile, but not warm either. Behind her came Chloe. The 16-year-old looked different than she had on the plane. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her braids pulled back in a ponytail. Without the first-class setting and the designer clothes, she looked younger, more vulnerable. But her eyes were the same, intelligent, observant, measuring. Grace stood up automatically, her legs feeling weak. Mrs. Adams. Chloe, she managed. Thank you for coming. Victoria nodded curtly and sat down at the head of the table. Chloe took the seat beside her mother, and Patricia moved to sit next to Grace, a subtle show of support that Grace appreciated more than she could say. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Victoria broke it. My daughter wanted this meeting. Against my better judgment, I might add, you have 15 minutes to say whatever you need to say. After that, Chloe will decide if she wants to continue this arrangement. Grace swallowed hard. 15 minutes. Her entire future, her chance at redemption, came down to 15 minutes. She looked at Chloe, forcing herself to make eye contact, even though everything in her wanted to look away. Chloe, Grace began, her voice shaking. I know I'm supposed to have prepared something eloquent and perfect to say, but the truth is, nothing I say can undo what I did to you. Nothing I say can give you back the dignity I tried to take from you on that plane. Chloe's expression didn't change, but she was listening. A week ago, when you asked me for the meal you'd ordered and paid for, I saw you and I didn't see you. I saw someone from my past. Someone who hurt me when I was 16 years old. Grace's voice cracked, but she pushed forward. Her name was Keisha Williams. She bullied me relentlessly for 2 years in high school. She was black, confident, successful, everything I wasn't, and she made my life miserable. I never understood why. When I finally asked her, she told me that my weakness made her angry because she had to be strong all the time. Grace paused, wiping her eyes. I carried that pain for 13 years. I let it sit inside me like poison. I told myself I was protecting myself by being wary of people who reminded me of her. But really, I was letting my trauma turn into prejudice. I was letting one person's actions color how I saw an entire group of people. So, when you looked at me, Chloe said quietly, speaking for the first time, you saw her. Yes, Grace admitted, and I know how wrong that is. You're not Keisha Williams. You're Chloe Adams, your own person with your own story. But my broken brain couldn't separate the two. Your confidence, your composure, the way you spoke up for yourself, all the things that make you strong and amazing, they triggered something in me, something ugly and unfair. Victoria's expression remained stern, but Grace thought she saw a flicker of something, understanding maybe, in her eyes. I treated you as less than because of the color of your skin, Grace continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I denied you service that I gave to white passengers. I made you feel unwelcome and unwanted in a space where you had every right to be. And I did it because I was carrying pain that had nothing to do with you. Grace's hands gripped the edge of the table. This past week, I've been learning about how racism works. How it's not just individual acts of hatred, but systems and biases that get passed down. How trauma can become prejudice if we don't deal with it properly. And I've realized something terrible. I became exactly what I hated. I became someone who judges people by how they look instead of who they are. I became a bully, just like Keisha was. A tear rolled down Grace's cheek. And you were just a 16-year-old girl who wanted a meal on a plane. You were polite. You were patient. You gave me so many chances to do the right thing. And instead, I made you have to defend your basic humanity. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Grace took a shaky breath. Chloe, I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back the dignity I tried to take. All I can do is tell you the truth. That what I did was wrong, that there's no excuse for it, and that I'm committed to spending the rest of my life making sure I never hurt anyone like that again. She looked directly into Chloe's eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Not because I got caught. Not because I lost my job. But because I hurt you. Because I made you feel less than when you're clearly exceptional. Because I let my pain become your problem. Grace's voice dropped to barely a whisper. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. The silence that followed felt eternal. Grace sat there, exposed and vulnerable, waiting for judgment. Chloe stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned to her mother. Mom, can I talk to Grace alone for a minute? Victoria looked surprised. Chloe, I don't think. Please, Mom, just 5 minutes. Victoria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. But something in her daughter's voice made her relent. She stood up, and Patricia followed her lead. They stepped out into the hallway, leaving Grace and Chloe alone in the conference room. Grace's heart pounded. Was this it? Was Chloe about to tell her exactly what she thought of her away from the adults? Chloe leaned back in her chair, studying Grace with those intelligent eyes. Do you know why I asked my mom to give you this chance? Chloe finally asked. Grace shook her head. Because when you ran away on the plane, I saw something in your face. You weren't running because you were caught. You were running because you were breaking. I've seen racism before. Trust me, I've seen plenty of it. And usually, the people do it are either clueless or cruel. But you looked lost. Chloe picked at a thread on her sweater. My mom teaches me to be strong, to stand up for myself, to not let anyone make me feel small because of my skin color. And I love her for that. But she also taught me something else. That understanding why people do harmful things doesn't mean excusing them, but it does mean seeing their humanity. Grace listened, hardly daring to breathe. I don't think you're a bad person, Grace, Chloe said. I think you're a hurt person who hurt someone else. And I think you genuinely want to change. But here's the thing. I'm not the one you need to convince. What do you mean? Grace asked. You need to convince yourself, Chloe replied. You need to believe that you're worth the work it takes to change. Because this program isn't going to be easy. There are going to be days when you want to quit, when facing your biases feels too hard, when it seems easier to just go back to who you were. Chloe leaned forward. But if you do that, if you quit, then you'll prove that people like you can't change. You'll make it harder for the next person who makes a mistake and genuinely wants to do better. Do you understand what I'm saying? Grace nodded slowly. You're saying I have a responsibility beyond just myself. Exactly, Chloe said. My mom is taking a huge risk giving you this chance. People are going to criticize her for it. Some will say she's being too soft on racism. Others will say she should have just destroyed you and moved on. She's doing this because I asked her to, and because she believes people can change. But you have to actually change, Grace, not just go through the motions. I will, Grace said firmly. I promise you, Chloe. I will do the work. Every day, no matter how hard it gets. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Then she did something Grace didn't expect. She pulled out her phone and opened up a note. I wrote something this week, Chloe said, after that day on the plane. I wrote it because I needed to process what happened. Do you want to hear it? Yes, Grace whispered. Chloe read from her phone, her voice steady. Today, someone looked at me and saw a threat instead of a person. They saw my confidence and called it aggression. They saw my skin color and made assumptions about who I am. It hurt. It made me angry. But it also made me sad. Because I wonder what happened to make them see the world that way. What pain did they carry that turned me into their enemy? Chloe looked up from her phone. I hope they heal. Not for my sake. I'll be fine. But for theirs. Because living with that much fear and anger must be exhausting. And I hope that one day they'll see people who look like me and just see people. Nothing more, nothing less. Grace's vision blurred with tears. You wrote that about me? I wrote that about whoever hurt you, Chloe corrected gently. And about you, and about everyone caught in this cycle of hurt, creating more hurt. I wrote it because I wanted to believe that cycles can be broken. She put her phone away and looked at Grace with an expression beyond her years. So here's my answer, Grace. I accept your apology. Not because you've earned my forgiveness. You haven't, not yet. But because I choose to believe you can become someone who earns it. I choose to believe that people can grow. That's my choice. Chloe stood up and walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. But Grace, if you mess this up, if you prove that I was wrong to believe in you, it won't just hurt you. It will hurt every person out there who's trying to change, who's fighting their own biases, who's doing the hard work of becoming better. Don't let us down. Then she opened the door, and Victoria and Patricia came back in. Victoria looked between her daughter and Grace, trying to read what had happened. Well, she can stay in the program. Chloe said, simply, she's doing the work. Victoria's eyebrows rose. Are you sure? I'm sure, Mom. Victoria studied Grace for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. All right, then we continue as planned. She turned to Grace, her voice becoming businesslike. You completed week 1. You have 5 months and 3 weeks remaining in the program. Patricia will continue to oversee your progress. Dr. Howard will continue your therapy. And Dr. Mitchell will continue your training. Thank you, Grace managed. Thank you for this chance. I won't waste it. See that you don't, Victoria replied. Then her expression softened slightly. Grace, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this because I'm soft on racism. I'm doing this because I believe in accountability and growth. You will be held to higher standards than anyone else in your department. You will be watched more closely. You will have to work twice as hard to prove yourself. I understand, Grace said. I hope you do. Victoria gathered her things. Because if you succeed, if you genuinely change, you won't just redeem yourself. You will become proof that transformation is possible. And in this world, we need that proof. Victoria and Chloe left together, mother and daughter, leaving Grace with Patricia. Grace collapsed back into her chair, emotionally exhausted, but feeling something she hadn't felt in 13 years. Free. Not free from consequences. Those were just beginning. Not free from the hard work ahead. That would take months, maybe years. But free from the weight of carrying her pain alone. Free from pretending it didn't affect her. Free from letting it control her life. You did well, Patricia said, packing up her tablet. That was genuine. Chloe saw it, and so did Mrs. Adams. I meant every word, Grace said. I know you did. That's why you're still here. Patricia headed toward the door, then paused. Grace, one more thing. Dr. Mitchell wants to see you Monday morning before your training session. He has something he wants to discuss with you. What is it? Patricia smiled mysteriously. You'll find out Monday. Have a good weekend. You've earned it. That night, Grace sat in her apartment with her journal open on her laptop. The cursor blinked, waiting. She started typing. Week 1 complete. I survived my first week. I learned about implicit bias, systemic racism, and how trauma can become prejudice. I cried more than I have in years. I faced truths about myself that I've been avoiding for over a decade. Today I apologize to Chloe Adams. I told her the truth about why I hurt her, and I didn't make excuses. And somehow, impossibly, she accepted my apology, Not because I've earned forgiveness, but because she chooses to believe I can. I don't understand that kind of grace, that kind of mercy. Chloe is 16 years old, and she understands things about compassion and justice that I'm only beginning to grasp at 31. Dr. Howard asked me in therapy what I want to come from all this. I didn't have an answer then, but I think I do now. I want to become someone who breaks cycles instead of perpetuating them. Someone who transforms pain into purpose instead of letting it become poison. Someone who, when they look at confident young black women, sees individuals worthy of respect, not threats to be feared. I want to become someone who makes Chloe's belief in me justified. Keisha Williams broke something in me 13 years ago. I let that brokenness define me for too long. But maybe, just maybe, Chloe Adams is helping me become whole again. Not through forgiveness I don't deserve yet, but through the opportunity to earn it. 5 months and 3 weeks to go. I can do this. I have to do this. Not just for me, for everyone. Grace saved the document and closed her laptop. Through her window, she could see the Houston skyline lit up against the night sky. Somewhere in that city was Tech Vision Industries, where she'd spend Monday morning learning whatever Dr. Mitchell wanted to discuss. Somewhere in that city was Chloe Adams, probably doing homework or texting friends or just being 16. Somewhere in that city was Keisha Williams, or maybe she left Houston long ago. Either way, she was out there somewhere, living her life, probably never thinking about the girl she'd bullied in high school. And that was okay. Grace didn't need to confront Keisha. She didn't need an apology from her, because this journey wasn't about Keisha anymore. It was about Grace choosing to become someone better than her pain had tried to make her. She walked to her bathroom and looked in the mirror, the same mirror where she stood a week ago, broken and ashamed, unable to face herself. The woman looking back at her now was still broken, still had so much work to do, still carried wounds that would take time to heal. But her eyes looked different, clearer, more honest. You can do this, Grace told her reflection. One day at a time, one choice at a time. You can change. And for the first time in 13 years, she actually believed it. 6 months later, the auditorium at Tech Vision Industries was filled with over 300 employees, department heads, team leaders, new hires, and everyone in between. It was the company's quarterly all-hands meeting, where Victoria Adams typically announced new initiatives and celebrated successes. But today was different. Grace stood backstage, her heart pounding, wearing a professional Navy dress that Patricia had helped her pick out. In a few minutes, she would walk out onto that stage and share her story with 300 people. The same story that had almost destroyed her was about to become her testimony. You ready? Patricia asked, standing beside her. No, Grace admitted, but I'm going to do it anyway. Patricia smiled. That's what courage is. On stage, Victoria Adams was speaking, her voice clear and commanding to the sound system. Which brings me to why we're all really here today. 6 months ago, I made a decision that many people questioned. Some thought I was being foolish. Others thought I was being too lenient on racism. But I made that decision because my daughter asked me to, and because I believe in our company's core value, that people can grow. Victoria paused, letting her words sink in. Today, I want to introduce you to someone who embodies that growth. Someone who has done the hard, painful work of confronting her own biases and transforming herself. Someone who proves that accountability and compassion can coexist. Grace took a deep breath. Please welcome Grace Morgan. Grace walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. 300 faces looked up at her, some curious, some skeptical, some supportive. And in the front row, she saw them. Patricia, giving her an encouraging nod. Dr. Mitchell, smiling proudly. Dr. Howard, who'd guided her through 6 months of intensive therapy. And there, sitting between her mother and father, was Chloe Adams, the 16-year-old, now 17 actually as of last month, looked up at Grace with those intelligent eyes. She didn't smile, but she nodded slightly. A reminder, don't let us down. Grace stepped up to the microphone. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Morgan, and 6 months ago, I discriminated against a teenage girl on an airplane because of the color of her skin. The auditorium was completely silent. I could make excuses. I could explain about my trauma, about being bullied, about how pain can turn into prejudice if you don't deal with it properly. And all of that is true, but it doesn't excuse what I did. It doesn't erase the harm I caused. Grace's voice grew stronger. That teenage girl is here today. Her name is Chloe Adams, and she's the daughter of our CEO. She could have destroyed me. Instead, she gave me a chance to become someone better. And I want to tell you what that journey has looked like. For the next 20 minutes, Grace shared her story. The bullying she'd experienced. The pain she'd carried. The moment on the plane when that pain became someone else's problem. The opportunity Victoria and Chloe had given her. But most importantly, she shared what she learned. I learned that understanding why you did something harmful doesn't excuse it, but it does give you a starting point for change. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do the right thing even when you're terrified. And I learned that transformation isn't a moment. It's a daily choice. Grace looked directly at Chloe. I can't change what I did 6 months ago, but I can choose who I become from this moment forward. And I choose to become someone who breaks cycles instead of perpetuating them. Someone who transforms pain into purpose. Someone who, when given the incredible gift of a second chance, uses it to help others find their own path to growth. She turned back to the audience. If you're sitting here today carrying pain that's turning into prejudice, if you're struggling with biases you don't know how to overcome, please know that change is possible. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. It will challenge everything you think you know about yourself. But it's possible. Grace's voice softened. And if you're sitting here wondering if people who cause harm can really change, I hope my presence here today is proof that they can. Not everyone will. Not everyone wants to do the work. But for those who do, for those who face their demons honestly and humbly, transformation is real. She gripped the podium. Thank you to Victoria Adams for taking a risk on me. Thank you to Patricia, Dr. Mitchell, and Dr. Howard for guiding me. Thank you to all my colleagues who've been patient with me as I've learned and grown. And most of all, thank you to Chloe Adams, who saw possibility in someone who'd hurt her and chose compassion over vengeance. Grace stepped back from the microphone. The applause started slowly, then built. Not everyone clapped. Grace could see some skeptical faces, some crossed arms. And that was okay. She hadn't earned everyone's trust yet. But Chloe Adams was clapping. And somehow that was enough. Employees had come up to thank her, to share their own stories of overcoming bias, to ask questions about the program. She was talking with Marcus from her training cohort when she saw Chloe approaching. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Chloe asked. "Of course," Grace replied. They walked to a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the crowd. "That took guts," Chloe said. "Sharing your story like that. Being that vulnerable in front of everyone." "I learned from the best," Grace replied. "You were pretty gutsy yourself on that plane, standing up for yourself while staying calm." Chloe smiled slightly. "Mom says I get that from her." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "Grace," Chloe said, "I want you to know something. When I asked my mom to give you this chance, I wasn't sure you'd actually do the work. I hoped you would, but I didn't know. But watching you these past 6 months, you've proved me right. You've actually changed." Grace felt tears prickling her eyes. "Thank you. That means everything." "Don't thank me yet," Chloe said with a grin, "because now comes the hard part." "What do you mean?" "Maintaining it, living it every day. Not just in a structured program with supervision, but out in the real world where nobody's watching. That's where the real test is." Grace nodded seriously. "You're right, but I'm ready for it. Or as ready as I'll ever be." Chloe studied her for a moment, then held out her hand. Grace looked at it, confused. "I want to start over," Chloe explained. "Hi, I'm Chloe Adams. I'm 17 years old. I like science and debate and argue with my mom about everything. Nice to meet you." Grace understood. This wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about moving forward as two people who both grew from a difficult experience. She took Chloe's hand and shook it. Hi, I'm Grace Morgan. I'm 31 years old. I work in diversity and inclusion, and I'm still learning every day. Nice to meet you, too. They smiled at each other, not quite friends, but not adversaries either. Something new, something hopeful. Victoria Adams appeared, looking for her daughter. When she saw them talking, she paused, watching an expression Grace couldn't quite read. Mom. Chloe called out, Come here. Victoria approached, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Grace did really well today, Chloe told her mother. She did, Victoria agreed. She looked at Grace with an expression that was almost proud. You've come a long way in 6 months. Thank you, Mrs. Adams, for everything, for the chance, for the structure, for pushing me to be better. Victoria nodded. You did the work, Grace. I just provided the opportunity. What happens next is up to you. What has happened next? Grace asked. That's actually something I wanted to discuss, Victoria said. Patricia tells me you completed all your training requirements ahead of schedule. Dr. Howard says your therapy progress has been exceptional, and Dr. Mitchell says you're ready for the next phase. Grace's heart beat faster. What's the next phase? Victoria's expression became businesslike again. We're expanding our diversity and inclusion program to other companies. Corporate consulting, basically. We need someone who understands prejudice on the inside, who can speak authentically about transformation, and who isn't afraid to be vulnerable. She paused meaningfully. We need you, Grace. If you're interested. Grace stared at her in shock. You want me to lead this program? Not lead it. Patricia will still oversee everything, but be a key part of it. Share your story. Help other companies understand how to address bias in their organizations. Prove that change is possible. Grace couldn't find words. I don't know if I'm qualified. Nobody's qualified to do something they've never done before, Victoria said. But you're the most qualified person I know to talk about overcoming prejudice, because you've actually done it. So what do you say? Grace looked at Chloe, who smiled encouragingly, then at Victoria, who waited patiently for an answer. 6 months ago, Grace had been sitting in an airport conference room, her life in ruins, facing the consequences of letting her trauma control her. Now she was being offered a chance to turn that pain into purpose, to help others avoid the mistakes she'd made, to prove that transformation was real. Yes, Grace said firmly. Yes, I'll do it. Victoria extended her hand, and they shook on it. CEO and employee, but also two women who'd learned that growth sometimes comes from the most unlikely places. Good, Victoria said. Your first consultation is next week. Patricia will brief you on Monday. As Victoria walked away, Chloe gave Grace a quick hug. Told you, Chloe whispered. You just had to believe you were worth it. Then she followed her mother, leaving Grace standing in the lobby of Tech Vision Industries, looking out at a future she never could have imagined. A future built not on the pain of her past, but on the work she'd done to heal from it. A future where Grace Morgan, the woman who'd once discriminated against a teenage girl on an airplane, would spend her life making sure others learned from her mistakes. It wasn't redemption. Grace knew she could never fully redeem what she'd done, but it was purpose. It was meaning. It was proof that people could change if they were willing to do the work. And sometimes that was enough. Epilogue, 1 year later. Grace stood at the front of a conference room in Dallas, Texas, presenting to the leadership team of a major corporation. She'd been consulting for almost 6 months now, traveling to different companies, sharing her story, helping them develop better diversity and inclusion programs. It was challenging work. Some people were receptive. Others were skeptical. A few were outright hostile, insisting that people like Grace couldn't really change. But Grace kept showing up, kept being honest, kept doing the work. Her phone buzzed with a text during her lunch break. Chloe, hey, just got accepted to Stanford. Full ride. Mom's crying happy tears. Thought you'd want to know. Grace smiled and typed back. Grace, that's amazing. Congratulations. You're going to do incredible things there. I'm so proud of you. Chloe, thanks. Hey, Stanford wants me to write an essay about overcoming adversity. Would it be okay if I wrote about what happened on the plane? About how choosing compassion over anger changed both our lives. Grace's eyes welled up. Grace, of course it's okay. It's your story too. Tell it however you need to. Chloe, cool. Also, Mom wants to know if you're free for dinner next time you're in Houston. Family dinner. Bring your appetite. Grace, I love that. Tell her thank you. Grace put her phone away and looked out the window at the Dallas skyline. Somewhere out there was Keisha Williams, the girl who bullied her all those years ago. Grace had never tried to find her, never tried to confront her, because she'd realized something important. Forgiveness was about the other person. It was about freeing yourself from the power they held over you. Grace had forgiven Keisha Williams, not because Keisha had earned it or even asked for it, but because carrying that anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. She'd forgiven herself, too, for letting her pain turn into prejudice, for hurting Chloe, for all the years she'd wasted being afraid. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean what happened was okay. It meant choosing to move forward instead of staying trapped in the past. Grace's phone buzzed again. Patricia, great presentation this morning. The Dallas team wants to hire us for a full 6-month engagement. Well done. Grace, really? That's incredible. Patricia, you've come a long way from that scared woman in the airport conference room. Mrs. Adams and I are both very proud of you. Grace stared at that last message for a long time. Proud of her. A year ago, she'd been fired, publicly shamed, convinced her life was over. Now she was helping other companies become more inclusive. She was sharing her story to educate others. She was proving that transformation was possible. She thought about teenage Grace, hiding in bathroom stalls, crying over sticky notes on her locker, wondering why Keisha Williams hated her so much. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming. The pain, yes, but also the growth, would she? Grace decided she would. She'd tell that scared 16-year-old that the pain wouldn't last forever, that she'd survive it, that she'd even learn from it, though the learning would be hard and uncomfortable. She'd tell her that hurt people, but healed people heal people. And she'd tell her that 13 years later, a 16-year-old black girl named Chloe Adams would look at her with eyes full of pain and choose compassion anyway, would give her a chance she didn't deserve, would believe in her potential to change. And that belief would save her life. Grace packed up her materials and headed back to the conference room for the afternoon session. She had work to do, lives to impact, cycles to break. And for the first time in 13 years, Grace Morgan was exactly where she was supposed to be,